There's one big mistake that organisations make, and it's less the organisations, it's more the department themselves, cyber department, and that's one of engagement and the language that they use to talk to people. It's really important that cybersecurity professionals are business people first, and then cybersecurity professionals second. And it can be quite the opposite way around what they expect as they move through their career. Most people think that they need to advance their knowledge about technology and they need to advance their knowledge about cybersecurity processes. But actually, it's about understanding the distinct parts of your business. In the retail sector that I work in, there's very different arms of the business. We have retail distribution and we'll have marketing, just to pull out two. They don't necessarily talk to each other, but of course I will need to talk to both of them. So I need to speak their language rather than expecting them to have the Rosetta Stone that speaks to me. So the biggest mistake that I see organisations make is one about engagement and language. I don't think it's for government to answer that question, it's organisations. And organisations are already really good at doing this. They need to look at the objectives for their business. And in many businesses, cybersecurity is not necessarily their highest priority, but in those that it is, certainly in retail at the moment, then they need to use the tried and tested means that they already have at their disposal. It's quite easy for organisations to attract talent, but they need to focus on attracting that talent. And you can't expect to just attract talent on a single hot topic like cybersecurity. So I think the best way of doing that is to expand your search and not just look through the traditional approach of expecting people to come from IT. Instead, take people from finance, take people from marketing, and look for their transferable skills that they have and try and develop those transferable skills. The best successes I've had in cybersecurity are people that have actually come from outside of the industry. And then I've taught them cybersecurity as an afterthought. Yes, we already have the nascent skills within the country to do this, but they're not necessarily working in cybersecurity at the moment. So if the government's going to do anything, then they need to start encouraging people out of the silos of information that they have and the silos of careers and start getting them to look at other skills in cybersecurity. The biggest problem we have is this perception that cybersecurity can be solved by cybersecurity people. It's not. When you have a mature organisation or a government with a mature response, then that's because those companies that do things, build things, sell things, whatever, they understand that security is part of the journey continuously. So naturally it should start to come out through the vocabulary of the organisations as they're talking to people. And we're not just going to do development, we're going to do secure development. And there's never a concept of doing something else other than that. So to answer your question directly, does the UK economy have the right amount of people to answer the risks? If you consider the example I've already given with development, yes, but you have to train the developers to be secure. Doesn't mean you need security people alongside developers. That's just a waste. Specifically, they're very little. The cybersecurity implications of GDPR don't necessarily translate directly to security outcomes in terms of things that you want to put in place or people or resources that you need, save the exception where you need data protection officers who are traditionally not necessarily associated to cybersecurity. That said, there are large programs of work that most organisations probably need to undertake if they haven't already undertook to do them. And that is around protecting the person identifiable data. Well, logically, you can only protect person identifiable data if you understand where it is, the systems that it's in, and the risks that are faced with it. So realistically, the only real thing you need to do is to do a risk assessment and then follow through with the outcomes of that risk assessment, whether they are updates to your policy, updates to your training, updates to your culture, or updates to technology. Those are the things that are realistically called out in the GDPR regulation. So the gender imbalance is a hot topic at the moment. It has been for a number of years, and it needs to carry on being a hot topic because there are too few women in cybersecurity. In fact, there are too few women in technology roles specifically. Now, the government has a part to play in that because they need to encourage girls from the very earliest ages to start picking up technology and playing with technology, rather than just seeing it as a bloke's environment, a man's environment. And then there's also the part to play for the blokes in the industry as well, to stop making the environment hostile to women coming into IT and into cyber. And it's not necessarily anything that they're conscious of that they are doing, but consider, is this the kind of environment I would want my daughter to work in? Is this the kind of environment I would like my wife or auntie or mother to work in? And if the answer is no, then really start to redress the way that you work. But to answer your question, does there need to be more to address it? Absolutely. There are way too few women in cybersecurity. You've only got to look at the stats for the country. Roughly 50-50 are male-female. There is nowhere near that balance in cyber. If we were being honest with ourselves and we looked at our hiring patterns and our hiring practices, you'd have to ask, why is it that women aren't fairly represented? One of the things that I've done and the things that I recommend people to do is encourage those recruitment agencies that you work with to pass you female CVs as well as male CVs. You don't need to hide the names, you just need to know that you have 10 CVs from females and 10 CVs from males. And what that does is it challenges the preconceptions of the recruitment agency that they're only going to be successful with male candidates. And that then allows me to pick from a pool of both female and male. And I can look at them and choose the person that is best suited for the role, regardless of gender. And where I've done that, that has been very successful. And I end up hiring quite a lot of women in the industry because actually the CVs that I'm seeing, they're the ones that are strongest. I think men and women bring exactly the same to the role, and it should be completely gender neutral in terms of whether or not somebody is male or female. It's about the right person for the role. But let's just be very clear, men and women are equal in all aspects. The only difference I can see is that women have the slight edge over men because they can have babies, whereas men can't. I anticipate the largest threat to cybersecurity over the next few years to be confirmation bias. It's something I've spoken about quite a lot in the past as well. The perception is that because you hear something in the press about cybersecurity, that cybersecurity is actually getting worse, when in reality it's not really changing. What we are seeing is that people are getting better at reporting cybersecurity crimes, and they're getting better at identifying cybersecurity crimes when they're happening. So the two tend to feed. Doesn't mean things have changed. The pressure from the attackers hasn't changed. And what that creates is this fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And then people start to have knee-jerk reactions in response to that uncertainty and that doubt. So my biggest concern is that actually we'll end up with a very tight set of regulations around cybersecurity. We'll have a very tight set of responses from an organisational level, and that doesn't necessarily replicate or at least respond to the risk that's actually relevant to them. Well, less so an example about confirmation bias and more about an example of how this issue has started to run away from itself. Take the recent issue with Facebook and the presidential elections. Almost certainly, an organisation helped the presidential elections and both sides of the campaign win a certain favour and certain losses by influencing adverts on Facebook and social media. But the problem is that people suddenly perceive, because the press is saying, that to be a bad thing. But you sign up to Facebook, which is a free service. If you're not paying for the service, then you're the product, and therefore that's how you're paying for it. So your interactions and comments on Facebook and other social media sites should never be considered to be secure or sensitive. And a thought the otherwise is actually an indication that you don't really understand what it is that you're doing. So from my perspective, the biggest problem in that space is more that our general economy and the citizens of the United Kingdom don't understand their interactions and what they're getting, and in particular what they're imparting when they join those services. I wasn't really outraged by the use of that information. I'm more outraged that people don't understand that they're giving away their data for free. And that's valuable, not just to them, but also to the companies they're giving it to. Very few organisations are well placed to handle confirmation bias or the problems that arise around the confirmation bias and fear, uncertainty and doubt. That comes down to the leadership in cybersecurity. There's a lot of opportunity to grow there in my part of the sector in terms of the CISO and the head of roles. We really need to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves the question, are we really capable of having a conversation at a business level, or are we just really good at cybersecurity? And if the answer is, well, no, then really we need to take ourselves out of that process and start to get better at business. And that's where I think organisations need to start employing at the very top levels of cybersecurity people from outside of cyber to ask those challenging questions and to look for the opportunities that people within cybersecurity don't necessarily know are there in the first place. There's some great innovations happening at the moment. We've got things like red teaming that's really picking up pace, and many organisations are looking to encourage red teams. And the natural opposite, or the dichotomy that you create when you have a red team, is that you need a blue team. So you need the attackers and the defenders. And that moves away from the traditional penetration test approach. The other innovation that links very closely to that is this instilling of agility and agile development, and away from a traditional, quite old-fashioned waterfall approach. The two go very much hand in hand. And that then helps invigorate and excite other people to come into the industry because they're looking at cybersecurity as doing something very new and innovative. And what we're doing in the organisation that I work in is we're gamifying the relationship between the red and the blue team, in that the people that attack our organisation, the red team, when they get a successful attack, they get points. And when the blue team defend against defend against those attackers, whether they're real or the red team, they also get points. We tally those points up every 5 weeks, and the person that gets the highest amount of points wins £200. And that has really motivated and incentivised those colleagues that work in that environment, and of course that's incentivised other people to actually come in and work with us from outside. Well, traditionally you have 3 lines of defence. You have your first line responders, the doers, and then you have the people that check the doers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then finally, in the third line of defence, you have the auditors, and whether that's internal audit or external audit. The bug bounty program should sit at your third line of response. So if you've got your software engineers making changes to your code base, they're the first line, they're the doers. They need to have an understanding of security and how to do it and work within your organisation. The second line, usually that's where your cybersecurity team sits. They sit over the top of the software engineers, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing through checks and balances. But then you can't assure yourself that actually that process is working well. And traditionally, you would then rely on an internal audit function or an external audit function to come in and check to make sure that's happening. But if you're working at pace and working in an agile manner, you're going through a very high cadence of delivery and expectation. So in many cases, you're going to be releasing lots of code or lots of changes to your website without necessarily having the traditional waterfall SDLC approach. In that case, that's where bug bounties play a perfect role, because they sit over the whole scope of your organisation, if you set the scope correctly, and they will try and hack in everywhere. And then they'll then tell you how they do it. And of course, it costs you money, but my experience has shown me that that cost is actually much less than continual penetration testing and the gated waterfall approach that SDLC mandates.